Maria Martha, a beloved teacher with a spotless reputation, is found dead at the base of a cliff, her life ending in a moment of horror that no one saw coming. Richard, a man from her past with a dark history, emerges as a prime suspect. But the truth of what happened that night is more shocking than anyone could have imagined. As the investigation unfolds, secrets and lies begin to surface, revealing a chilling connection between them, one that would ultimately lead to Maria Martha's tragic and untimely death. It was a quiet Thursday morning when the small town of Willow Creek was jolted awake by an unsettling discovery. The peaceful rhythm of daily life was shattered when a group of hikers, out for their usual early trek, stumbled upon a body at the base of a steep cliff just outside town. The lifeless form was that of Maria Martha, a well-known and beloved local teacher who had earned a reputation for her kindness and dedication to her students. For the residents of Willow Creek, the news of her death was nothing short of shocking. Maria Martha had been a constant presence in their community, someone everyone trusted and admired. The hikers, who had initially assumed they were witnessing a tragic accident, immediately called the authorities. Within minutes, the sound of sirens pierced the still morning air as police and emergency responders rushed to the scene. When they arrived, they found the body of Maria Martha sprawled at the base of the cliff. She was wearing her usual hiking clothes, suggesting she had been out for a walk or a short hike before her death. The investigators began to piece together what little information they could, but nothing about the scene felt right. At first glance, it appeared to be a tragic accident. The cliff was known to be dangerous, and the path leading up to it was narrow and winding, making it easy to imagine how someone could lose their footing and fall. However, as the investigators carefully examined the scene, several things raised doubts. There were no signs of struggle, no indication that Maria Martha had been pushed or attacked. The surrounding area was undisturbed, with no footprints or evidence of a confrontation. But there was something else, something subtle, that suggested her fall might not have been as accidental as it seemed. Her body had been found in an unusual position, with her arms and legs stretched out in a way that didn't align with a typical fall. It was as though she had been carefully placed, or at least her body had been moved after the fall. There were no marks on her body that indicated a fatal injury from the fall itself, but a closer inspection revealed something troubling. A small but noticeable bruise on her neck suggested she had been strangled. That discovery turned the case from a simple accident into something far more sinister. As the investigation progressed, the authorities began to wonder if Maria Martha's death was truly an accident. Was it possible that someone had followed her out to the cliff, either with malicious intent or something darker in mind? The idea of foul play was now on the table, and the police had no choice but to treat it as a potential murder. But if Maria Martha had been murdered, who would have wanted to harm her? The town was small, and everyone knew each other. Maria Martha was beloved by her students and colleagues alike. She was the kind of person who could always be relied upon to lend a helping hand or offer a listening ear. Her warm smile and genuine nature made her a fixture in the community. So the question weighed heavily on everyone's mind. Who could have possibly wanted to hurt someone like Maria Martha? The investigation would make many twists and turns in the days to come, but it was clear that the truth behind her death would not be so easily uncovered. For now, Willow Creek was left to grapple with the grim uncertainty surrounding the loss of one of their own, and the mystery of whether Maria Martha had died by accident or if something far more sinister had occurred. As the investigation into Maria Martha's death deepened, detectives began to uncover layers of her life that had been hidden from public view. The initial shock of her tragic death had left the community reeling, but the questions surrounding it only grew with each passing day. Who would want to harm a beloved teacher with such a kind-hearted reputation? Was there more to Maria Martha's life than anyone had known? Detectives began by speaking with those who had known her best: her friends, colleagues, and students. On the surface, Maria Martha seemed to be everything one could hope for in a community member: generous, reliable, and adored by everyone. But as they dug deeper into her personal life, a different picture began to emerge. While she had cultivated a friendly and caring image, there were whispers about a troubled past, a history that some of those closest to her had tried to forget. Maria Martha had been married once before to a man named Greg, but their marriage had ended in divorce several years ago. The split had been messy, with rumors of infidelity and emotional strain. Though the details of their separation had never been fully public, some of her friends spoke of how hard it had been on her. She had rarely spoken about Greg in the years following their divorce, and those who had tried to bring up the subject said she would quickly change the topic or dismiss the conversation altogether. It was clear that the end of her marriage had left a mark on her, though it wasn't something she was willing to share with anyone. More troubling still was the mention of a former colleague. Richard, a man who had worked at the school with Maria Martha years earlier. They had been close at one time, their professional relationship blossoming into a deep friendship, but that had soured abruptly. According to some of her coworkers, Richard had been fired after a series of inappropriate incidents involving his conduct with students. Maria Martha had been one of the key people who had pushed for his dismissal, and after that, he vanished from town. No one had heard from him in years, until recently, when his name had resurfaced. It seemed that Richard had been trying to reconnect with Maria Martha. She had been receiving messages from him in the weeks leading up to her death, messages that ranged from friendly to cryptic and unsettling. Though the messages had started off casual, they soon took a darker turn. He would express how much he missed their friendship, but also hint at unresolved issues that Maria Martha had never been willing to address. Some of the messages suggested that Richard might have been angry at her for her role in his firing, and that he had never fully forgiven her. The possibility that Richard had returned to town and somehow become involved in Maria Martha's death sent a chill down the investigators' spines. Could he have been the one to meet her at the cliff that night? Was there something between them that had led to an argument, a confrontation that spiraled out of control? To the outside world, Maria Martha had always been the epitome of grace and generosity. But the deeper the detectives dug, the more it seemed that her life had been complicated by secrets and unresolved tension with those from her past. As they sifted through her personal letters, phone records, and even social media messages, it became clear that she had been trying to reconcile the past that she had kept hidden from most people. But now, those very same secrets were beginning to look like potential motives for her tragic death. What had happened that night on the cliff? Was Richard's return to Willow Creek part of the puzzle? Or was there another, darker force at work in Maria Martha's life? The more the investigators uncovered, the more uncertain they became about the truth. As the investigation into Maria Martha's death progressed, a key breakthrough emerged from an unexpected source. A local fisherman named Alan, who had been out on his boat the evening Maria Martha died. He had been fishing near the lake that bordered the cliff, a popular spot for locals looking to escape the bustle of the town. Alan's account would prove to be both puzzling and crucial to the case. According to Alan, he had been out on the water around dusk, enjoying a quiet evening when he noticed something unusual. He had seen a car parked near the trail leading up to the cliff, an area that was typically deserted at that time of night. The car, a dark-colored sedan, was positioned at an odd angle, as though someone had hastily parked it. Alan recalled that the car had not been there earlier in the evening when he passed by the same spot, which struck him as odd. He mentioned that he didn't think much of it at the time, but as he continued to fish, he noticed the car was still there when he glanced over at the shore. This caught his attention, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was out of place. What made Alan's account even more intriguing was his description of a shadowy figure he had seen briefly on the cliff's edge as he looked up from his fishing spot. He wasn't sure if it was a man or woman, but the person appeared to be standing still, looking out toward the lake. Alan didn't get a clear view of their face, and by the time he had packed up his gear and headed back to his car, the person was gone, as was the vehicle. At first, Alan didn't think much of the sighting, but after hearing about Maria Martha's death the following morning, he began to wonder if the two events were connected. The authorities immediately took Allen's statement seriously, and his testimony prompted them to investigate the car further. They combed through nearby security footage from local businesses and cameras positioned along the road, but the results were inconclusive. No one could identify the owner of the vehicle, and no footage captured anyone walking toward the cliff at the exact time of Maria Martha's fall. It was frustrating, but the more the investigators delved into Allen's story, the more they realized that his observations were eerily timed. Could this car and the mysterious figure be tied to Maria Martha's tragic fate? Allen's testimony didn't just suggest that someone may have been near the scene when Maria Martha died. It raised the question of whether that person had been watching her, following her, or even waiting for her. What had drawn the mysterious individual to the cliff that night? Was it coincidence, or did they know something the police had yet to uncover? Detectives began revisiting the area, retracing Maria Martha's steps, hoping to find something they had missed earlier. They examined the surrounding terrain more carefully, searching for signs that someone might have been waiting in the shadows, observing the path Maria Martha had taken. The evidence was scant, but Allen's account kept resurfacing in their minds, suggesting that something, or someone, had been lurking in the quiet darkness, waiting for the right moment. In the days that followed, the mystery deepened. The more the detectives investigated, the more they realized that Maria Martha's death wasn't just a tragic accident. There was something far more sinister at play. The connection between the mysterious car, the shadowy figure, and the strange circumstances surrounding the cliff began to take shape. But the question remained: who had been there that night, and what role had they played in the untimely death of a woman who had always seemed so untouchable? As the investigators dug deeper, they knew they were on the cusp of uncovering something far darker than anyone could have imagined. The town of Willow Creek, once a peaceful and quiet place, was now the center of a mystery that no one could have predicted. As the investigation into Maria Martha's death grew more complex, the detectives were beginning to feel the weight of the unanswered questions. They had a growing sense that there was something they were missing, a key piece of the puzzle that might tie everything together. And then a breakthrough came from an unlikely source: Maria Martha's desk at the local school. The discovery of a letter, hidden away in one of the drawers, would lead the investigation down a dark and unexpected path. The letter was postmarked just days before Maria Martha's death and was addressed to her from Richard, the man from her past whom she had kept distant for years. It was an unsettling find, considering the rumors that had begun to swirl about Richard's return to town. The letter was brief but chilling in its tone. At first glance, it appeared to be nothing more than a reconciliation attempt, a plea for understanding, perhaps an attempt to mend their fractured past. But as the detectives read further, the true nature of the letter became apparent. Richard's words were veiled in polite phrasing, but there was an unmistakable underlying tension. The most troubling sentence, the one that would send a shiver down anyone's spine, read, "I know what you did, and I will make you pay." The words hung in the air as the detectives absorbed their meaning. It was a threat, plain and simple. But what did it mean? What had Maria Martha done to provoke such an ominous message? And why hadn't she shared it with anyone? The letter didn't just raise questions. It left the detectives feeling uneasy. They immediately turned their attention back to Richard. What had happened between him and Maria Martha all those years ago that might have left such a deep scar? The memories of their friendship had apparently turned into something far more complicated. The detectives dug deeper into the history between the two, speaking with former colleagues and people who had known them both during their time together at the school. As they unraveled the story of Richard's firing, they learned disturbing details. He had been let go after a series of inappropriate interactions with students, some of which were said to be manipulative and troubling. Maria Martha had been among those who had spoken out against him, and her role in his dismissal had earned her the ire of a man who clearly held a grudge. Richard's firing had been the catalyst for his abrupt departure from town, but not before leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Had Richard been trying to make amends with Maria Martha, or was his return to town motivated by something more sinister? The detectives couldn't be sure, but the letter made one thing clear. Richard had never truly let go of his anger, and he had intended to confront Maria Martha. The timing of the letter was also highly suspicious. It had arrived just days before Maria Martha's death, and the chilling tone suggested that whatever had transpired between them in the past had not been resolved. The detectives began to speculate whether the confrontation that occurred on the night of her death had been premeditated. Had Maria Martha intended to meet with Richard to talk things through? And if so, had their encounter turned violent in some way? The letter raised more questions than it answered, and as the investigators pieced together the fragments of Maria Martha's life, the unsettling possibility of murder began to solidify. The evidence was still circumstantial, but the presence of Richard in her life at the time of her death, coupled with the threatening message, suggested that there was more to the story than anyone had realized. Maria Martha's life had not been as simple or straightforward as it had seemed. The town had seen her as a beacon of kindness and integrity, but the reality was far more complicated. And as the investigation continued, the detectives knew they were edging closer to the truth, a truth that, once revealed, would change everything the town thought it knew about their beloved teacher. The letter was just the beginning. As the investigation into Maria Martha's death intensified, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place with unsettling clarity. The detectives had spent weeks uncovering hidden aspects of her life, and now they were on the verge of uncovering the truth. With the discovery of the threatening letter from Richard, the investigators were certain that he played a significant role in her death. But there was still one crucial detail that they hadn't yet uncovered: the last phone call Maria Martha had made before her untimely demise. The breakthrough came when the phone records were finally retrieved. They revealed a series of calls made on the night Maria Martha died, and the most significant of them was the last one. It had been placed to none other than Richard, just hours before her body was found at the base of the cliff. The timing was key. The call had lasted only a few minutes, but that was enough to confirm that Maria Martha and Richard had been in direct communication shortly before her fall. The detectives were left with the unsettling question: what had they talked about, and had their conversation led to the tragic confrontation that would follow? Further examination of the phone records revealed another surprising twist. While it was clear that Maria Martha had spoken to Richard in the hours leading up to her death, the final call was not made to him at all. In fact, the last call she made was to her sister, Emily. This revelation stunned the investigators. Why had Maria Martha contacted her sister instead of Richard, especially after the troubling letter and the tense history between them? What had they discussed during that brief exchange? Emily's testimony offered the missing piece of the puzzle. She explained that her sister had confided in her just days before her death. Maria Martha had been planning to meet with Richard in an attempt to confront him about the past. Emily had tried to warn her sister, fearing that Richard's return might not be as innocent as Maria Martha believed. She had urged her not to meet him, citing his unpredictable behavior in the past, but Maria Martha had insisted that she needed closure. Emily knew her sister had been torn, but she had never expected that meeting to end in tragedy. The final call between Maria Martha and Emily had been a frantic one. Maria Martha had told her that she was about to meet Richard at the cliff, but she assured her sister that everything would be fine. It seemed that Maria Martha had been trying to make peace with the past, to somehow fix what had been broken. Emily had been fearful for her safety, but couldn't stop her sister from going. The call ended abruptly, leaving Emily with a sense of dread that only deepened when she heard the news of her sister's death the following morning. As the detectives pieced together this information, it became clear that the tragic events of that night had been the result of a series of fateful decisions. Maria Martha had intended to confront Richard, but something had gone horribly wrong during their meeting. The tension between them, years of unresolved anger and betrayal, had exploded. The struggle at the cliff's edge had escalated in a way no one could have predicted. In the end, it was not a deliberate act of violence, but rather a tragic accident. In the heat of their confrontation, Maria Martha had lost her balance, falling to her death as she tried to escape the chaotic encounter. The truth was heartbreaking. Maria Martha had not been murdered, as the investigators had initially suspected. Her death had been the result of a momentary lapse in judgment, a series of choices that led to an irreversible, tragic conclusion. Her confrontation with Richard had been a final attempt at closure, but it had ended in disaster. The complexities of their past had come to a head, and in the heat of the moment, Maria Martha had lost her life. The revelation sent shockwaves through the town of Willow Creek. The mystery of Maria Martha's death, which had plagued the community for weeks, was finally solved, but the sense of loss remained. No one could undo the tragic events that had unfolded on that quiet evening. Maria Martha's life, filled with kindness and dedication, had ended in a moment of unfortunate misjudgment, a poignant reminder of how fragile life could be. As the investigation closed, the town was left to grapple with the aftermath of Maria Martha's death, a tragic accident that had taken the life of a woman who had meant so much to everyone around her. Her legacy would live on, but the haunting memory of that final call would linger in the hearts of those who loved her most.